no more important than Benedict Spence, who's in a bit of a grumpy mood this morning, I have to say. Benedict, aren't you? Why are you at war with the world, apart from everything that I've just laid out?
Oh, apart from the politics of the country, I mean, I suppose it all feeds into the politics of the country, doesn't it?
Did you just got out of bed the wrong side this morning?
Possibly. Also, the tube wasn't working very well, the lifts in this building weren't working very well, just everything seems to conspire. My dry cleaner has managed to completely ruin this suit. Just everything today is just decided that it's not going to agree with me, so I'm not going to agree with it. But at the least, I can blame things like the tube on Sadiq Khan. I can blame this on the ineptitude of a dry cleaner.
Yes.
But, you know, the bigger political issues can also be blamed on people, but they're far harder to sort of pinpoint what you do to solve this sort of thing. The tube can be solved by, well, I was about to say it can be solved by getting other forms of transport, but you can't do that. It's almost impossible to drive a car in London. You have to rely on a taxi or a bus. Buses are overcrowded. Taxis are expensive if they turn up at all. So actually, no, I can't solve that at all.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you thought Kevin O'Sullivan was the grumpiest man on TalkTV. I think his crown has just been stolen by Benedict Spence.
I can get worse as well.
I'm sure you can.
I'm being very balanced.
I'd say that I'm going to try and cheer you up a little bit throughout the show, but I can't promise to do that. Look, let's get into some of the news of the day, particularly first of all this speech late yesterday from Ken McCallum, who's the head of MI5, and the fact that he has taken it upon himself to tell us what a threat there is now from not just Russia but from Iran, of course. Now, we're used to Russia being threats to us. I mean, they kind of buzz our fighter planes, they decide to send their entire fleet up the English Channel on rare occasion, and of course they poison people in Salisbury and get away with it. So we're quite used to, I think, the Russians playing games and testing our mettle, so to speak. But he's decided to come out and say that actually the threat is increasing. Why do you think he's taken this opportunity to do so at this time?
Well, I think for a start, a lot of people have slightly forgotten what's going on in Eastern Europe. I think far too much attention has been paid to Israel, Palestine and what's going on there, that people have slightly lost sight of the fact that there's still a war going on in Ukraine, and that the Russians have a weird fixation with us. They actually seem to think that we're incredibly capable of all sorts of nefarious dealings, which, you know, all of us sort of sit here and go, well, if only we were that capable of, you know, committing the same sort of espionage acts or interference that they claim we are.
Putin's been watching too many old British spy films?
I think that I think that a lot of people in Russia who are currently in the security apparatus were brought up at a time when we were a bit of a threat.
I mean, he knows James Bond's not real, right?
I mean, famously, Stalin was very keen on cowboy movies. So, you know, he used to get really into the whole sort of cowboy genre, unaware that the entire period only lasted about 8 years.
Yeah.
He was very much of the opinion that this was still a real-life thing. So it's entirely possible that he thinks that Daniel Craig is a real person. Well, no, Daniel Craig is a real person, but his character is a real person.
And that he is a threat as such.
Who knows? I mean, the thing is, though, they like, I think, to paint Britain as this bit of a boogeyman because, as I say, it has sort of Cold War echoes. You know, lots of people are very familiar with the idea of sort of the perfidious Brit, the sort of the duplicitousness of our security services. So it plays quite well, often to be able to explain ineptitude in Russia's own security forces, to be able to blame the British, whereas, of course, in the Russian understanding, the average American is very stupid. So you can't possibly say that this, that and the other was caused by American interference because they're all idiots. So what is it? It's those Brits. It's those well-educated, well-heeled, very polite, but very tricky Brits.
But my question, Benedict, is why? I mean, we'll do two questions as to why. Why did Ken McCallum, the director of the MI5, take to making a speech yesterday at this time? And he said some other stuff, actually, which is quite compelling and that I'm sure will become a trigger for conversation and for engagement on this show in a second, and I'll come back to that. But why has he taken this opportunity to do so? But also, generally, why does Putin think that it is beneficial to him when he's fighting a war that, frankly, he's losing kind of 2.5 years in the Ukraine? What is the point? Do you think it's just propaganda? Do you think it's for the purposes of him almost reenacting the Stalin administration, the Stalin figure, and showing his people that he is strong enough to poke a stick at us as Brits?
Yeah, I don't think it's just propaganda. I do think that, it's very likely that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States, not Kamala Harris. And you can tell that because Kamala Harris is suddenly appearing on TV a lot. She's actually seen the internal
Which is making it worse for her.
Yeah, it is. But that is what's happened, basically. She thought she'd done very well after the debate, and now the internal polling say, oh, actually, Trump's ahead in a lot of these swing states, so she's desperately trying to claw that back. So a lot of people expect Trump's going to be the next president, and everybody knows he's not going to necessarily be of the same position of Joe Biden on the subject of Ukraine. There'll be less money, there'll be less support. So where is the sort of the battle cry going to come from in the West for supporting Ukraine? it's a very easy win for British prime ministers who are in a bit of a difficult situation to say we're going to double down on support for Ukraine because, broadly speaking, the British population are very pro-Ukraine. So I suspect he's looking at that and thinking, right, well, there's going to be a bit of a vacuum in a month's time. Somebody's going to want to fill it, and there's a British prime minister who's having a very difficult time of things at the moment, who's being accused of being unpatriotic, having just given away sovereign territory, including a naval
You think
base.
he sees blood as such in the water politically here?
I think
a weakened Keir Starmer already, and therefore he's pushing him a little further, just to try and further destabilise.
I think so.
That makes some sense.
And seeing the riots as well, seeing that there is a degree of social discord in the UK, he's probably thinking, well, now is a good time. I don't think he quite understands the psyche of the British people, which is that actually if you start causing trouble here, that's not necessarily going to make them less keen on interacting or engaging with Russia over the subject of Ukraine. But I think he senses that it's a similar situation to the US, where discord means that actually he can sow more discord. And I'm not sure.
Let's continuing on the theme of attacks. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves and her attack on pensioners, shall we? So not only, of course, has she decided, or the administration, the government has decided to take away the winter fuel allowance, which obviously has been very well documented, but it looks like now she is considering slashing the tax-free pension withdrawal process in another raid on OAPs. 80% of pensioners apparently on the poverty line, they're going to lose their winter fuel payouts. Looks like this is a further insult to pensioners. This is on the cards, no doubt will be announced in the budget, as well as he's being trailed, some other things around pensioners having to pay national insurance on any earnings as pensioners. Also, the spectre of losing their bus passes. I mean, this stuff doesn't come from nowhere. This is clearly being trailed by this government. Let me just give you a little message, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. You don't need to trail this stuff, this further attack and assault on pensioners, to find out that it is grossly unpopular, sinister, and frankly outrageous to attack what is a very vulnerable part of this country and its most vulnerable demographic. So the fact, Benedict, that Rachel Reeves is now honestly considering slashing tax-free pension withdrawals as well as everything else. I mean, talk about heartless.
What it shows, what it shows is that there is an understanding, at least in the Labour Party, that there is an imbalance and that something is wrong in the country, and that is that working people are being taxed too much. But it shows you the mindset of the Labour Party, that their idea is to then go, OK, well, we need to tax other people even more to balance that out, rather than maybe lower the burden on those who are working and being overtaxed. That's, that's the sort of the fundamental disconnect in how growth works, is they've gone, more people need to be taxed because it's unfair on these working people. It is the elderly who should also be taxed, rather than maybe give the working people a helping hand and lower their taxes. That's the issue here.
When we listen to the rhetoric in the campaign, the Labour Party campaign for government, and they talked about, protecting the ordinary working person. Actually, some of us knew that the Labour government would resort to type, and that is to shore up the public sector, to borrow more, to be slaves to the public sector, frankly, because, of course, let's not forget it is the unions that are their paymasters. But I don't think we quite thought that the seesaw, the balance would swing so acutely against everybody else.
I'm not surprised, to be honest. I mean, for a start, they said that they were going to protect working people. Well, a lot of these elderly people are not working, so technically it's not a lie.
So
they can't say, it's okay in their minds, they're going, well, we haven't lied to anybody, we're going after non-working people.
We did say.
The scroungers in their 80s. There is an uncomfortable reality, which is that there is a lot of wealth in this country tied up in property, and a lot of that is held by the retired, by elderly people, and as time goes on, that percentage of the country's wealth is increasing. But again, rather than looking at ways of creating more wealth, what Labour is doing is going, that is wealth that we can go after, we can tax, we can try to make life very difficult for pensioners, potentially even facilitate them beginning the process of moving homes early, getting them back on the market, monetising the asset so that we can tax it.
But isn't it more blatantly political than that? Isn't this just thinking about the next election in 2029?
The next demographic.
Yes, these pensioners, yes, they vote, but they generally vote Conservative. The old adage that the older you get, the more likely you are to vote towards the right. But also, and this is the callous bit, if this is true, is that many of these pensioners, of course, will not be around in 5 years to vote, and therefore they are an easy target as a consequence. Do you think that goes through the SPAD's minds, the politicos' minds?
I do think that is something that they do consider. There's no point in getting around that. People will turn around and say, what an outrageous suggestion. It absolutely, there are many economists who that is one of the first things that they'll be thinking about in number 11. But I also think it's a bit of a foolish thing, given the size of Labour's majority in terms of seats does not correspond to actual votes at the last election. These young people were not turning out for Labour in droves. If you don't improve their economic situation and make their lives easier, which this will not, I don't think they'll stick with them.
And there's talk now of the youth vote actually also now moving over to the right.
We've seen this in Europe a lot.
Quickly before we go to a break, of course, those that will hold this hapless Labour government to account will be either Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick or James Cleverly.
Pretty gumdrops.
So obviously we're down to the last three. Yes, not very inspiring, is it?
Yeah.
So Jenrick and Badenoch in particular locked in a battle. It looks like, from my point of view, there seems to be this huge disparity, though, between the Parliamentary Conservative Party, the fact that obviously they favour James Cleverly. The membership does not. They actually favour either Badenoch, actually, she is the most favoured amongst the membership, or Jenrick. I mean, what a lousy process it is to actually give the membership the last two that actually the membership themselves don't seem to want to choose between.
The irony of this situation is that the general public, who get no say, they didn't like any of these people. They actually quite liked Tom Tugendhat, and they just got rid of Tom Tugendhat. So, you know, whether or not you like Tom Tugendhat's politics, the one that was the most electable, both the Tory members, the leaders, basically have gone absolutely no, we don't want anything to do with that guy. I can't get upset, though, about what's currently going in. There are lots of people who are very upset because a lot of people are talking about how this basically looks like it's Jenrick's last hurrah. He's not going to make the final two. He went down slightly in the voting yesterday. And people going, oh, well, this shows that it's the end of the Tory party. I'm sorry, but he was a centrist Cameroon until about 4 months ago. Why are people believing his snake oil?
Well, many of them, I mean, I think they've all been shapeshifters. Maybe less so James Cleverly, but Robert Jenrick, you know, you'd think back 1 or 2 or 3 years, he certainly wasn't the right-wing stalwart that he's now pretending to be. And of course, Kemi Badenoch, I have to say, although she's seen as of the right, she, of course, has made all sorts of statements around immigration and the fact that actually she favours a more liberal immigration approach. So the problem's going to be, not just if you're a Conservative voter, but on the basis that the opposition, His Majesty's opposition, should be strong and hold the government to account. And God, doesn't it need to be held to account? I'm not sure under any of these three that that's going to happen.
I don't think